What's up, guys? It's Woke Fatty. Welcome back to another episode of Fat White Trash Guy reading the Communist Manifesto. Last episode, we read Chapter 2, Communists and Proletarians. And we had some insightful things to say and read. So, naturally, today we will be reading Chapter 3 of the Communist Manifesto. This is Socialist and Communist Literature. Section 1, Reactionary Socialism. A, feudal socialism. He's breaking it down a lot. Okay. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literacy battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interests, and to formulate its indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took its revenge by singing lampoons against its new master and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future. At times, by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. Don't know what an alms bag is. Somebody enlighten me on that. In front of the banner. But the people, as often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted out loud and irreverent laughter. And deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French Legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different from that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different, and that now are antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this, that under the bourgeoisie regime, a class is being developed, which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid, don't know that word, the bourgeoisie is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. Vodka. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism, a socialist, against marriage, against the state. Oh. Bro, I've skipped a line completely. Sorry, let me restart that line. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. Feudal socialism. Not going to lie, I wasn't following at all. No clue what he was describing here. Is he, it almost, well, we'll read on. Maybe the next And maybe I don't understand it because feudalism is so far out of our lexicon now, because this was in the 1880s. So maybe it's just not something I would understand, right? So section B is petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose conditions of existence pined and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. Did I skip a page? No, it felt thick. I'm sorry. Pause. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufacturers, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. So, sorry about my phone, by the way. I had it turned on as a flashlight, and I had the ringer on. My bad. This sounds much like modern day small businesses that just really can't compete with these big box chains and big corporations. They didn't have Walmart in 1880, so he even predicted that. He basically predicted that these smaller places will not be able to compete with big business, and that that's the most obvious thing we see today, is that small business just has no chance, and the petty bourgeoisie is cooked. Essentially, they're cooked because they often have to charge higher prices, or the quality is cut, or the staff is paid like shit. When they're not at scale with these huge corporations, it just because they want to make a profit. And you just can't do that when Walmart's down the street. You know what I'm saying? So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that people don't pay their employees a living wage. It's unfortunate that we're at a time where just paying the bills isn't enough, and even the petty bourgeoisie struggles to even pay the bills. So obviously they're going to either be fucking over their staff, or they're going to be fucking over their clientele. The big businesses, big corporations will fuck everybody over and tell you that you like it, But so anyway, don't even listen to what I just said. It was not a good analysis at all. I'm a dumbass. Moving on. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use in their criticism of the bourgeois regime the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois, and from the standpoint of the intermediate classes should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism, Sismondi. Petty bourgeois socialism Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. I think that's a guy or a woman. I don't know who, but this school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction, and crises. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, seeing that right now, the dissolution of old moral bonds, and the old family relations of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations, and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been and were bound to be exploded by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts had dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. God damn. Guess he doesn't like that one, huh? C. German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of a bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and men of letters, I don't know what that means, eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not been immigrated along with them. In contact with the German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified in their eyes the laws of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. So basically he's saying the French Revolution was not even a socialist revolution, it was just like common sense. And honestly, that feels like where America's headed. You know, I don't necessarily see a socialist revolution in America. There's far too many brainwashed people. But I could see a common sense revolution where we turn into a more, we're at least like more of the European countries. There's a little more common sense in the way that we're governed. I don't know. Fuck. Okay, I almost lost my spot, but we're good, folks. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. Excuse me. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. I don't know anything about the texts he's referring to, so don't even ask. If someone knows, please say in the comments. But I know nothing about what he's talking about here. Because I assume he's talking about different texts that are kind of precursors to Marx. Because everyone says Marx and Engels are the fathers of Marxism. You think? Are the fathers of socialism, socialist philosophy. So I'm sure he's talking about things that kind of predated this time period. No shit. So anyway, if anyone knows, let me know. Because I don't. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness, and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth, not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. He spelled fantasy with a PH as well. I've never seen that. That's interesting. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock in trade in such mountebank fashion, don't know the word, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. This fight of the German, and especially of the Prussian bourgeoisie against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. By this, the long-wished-for opportunity was offered to true socialism of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by this bourgeois movement. German socialism forgot in the nick of time that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeois society, with its corresponding economic conditions of existence, and the political constitution adapted thereto. The very things whose attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. Holy shit, a lot of this was going right over my head. I'm sorry if I'm, reading this like shit, because a lot of it's, you know what I mean? Anyway, to the absolute governments, with their following of parsons, professors, country squires, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie. It was a sweet finish after the bitter pills of floggings and bullets, with which these same governments, just at that time, closed the risings of the German working class. While this true socialism thus served the governments as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it at the same time directly represented a reactionary interest. The interest of German Philistines, or Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century and since then constantly cropping up again under various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction, on the one hand from the concentration of capital, on the other from the rise of a revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. Hantavirus. Not funny. I shouldn't have even said that. The robe of speculative cobwebs embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment. Dude's a poet over here. Holy smokes. Steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to increase wonderfully the sale of their goods amongst such a public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. Philistine? Sorry. Stupid. It proclaimed the German nation to be the model nation. Uh-oh. Careful. And the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man, it gave a hidden, higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of his real character. It went to the extreme length of directly opening the brutally destructive tendency of communism and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles, with very few exceptions. All the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, as of 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. So he's saying true socialism ain't it. Again, I don't know anything about the texts that he's referring to here, so, what the fuck do I know? But if you've read them before, maybe that makes sense to you. So that was one. Let me go back a couple pages and see. So one is reactionary socialism. And so those three in that section were feudal socialism, petty bourgeois socialism, and German socialism. So now we're into the second section, which is conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. To this section belong economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, PETA, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. We may cite Proudhon's philosophy of poverty as an example of this form. The socialistic bourgeois want all the advantages of modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best. And bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. The cat's up here in frame. Oh, just the tail. Just the tail. You want to get on my shoulder? No? Okay, well, if she gets on my shoulder, it's fine. Shit. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best. Conception into various more or less complete systems. And she just kicked my fucking bookmark. Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm sorry. Kitty, what are you doing, man? Her name's Ariel. Anyway. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best. Let's see how many more times I'll read that fucking line. And bourgeoisie socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system, and thereby to march straight away into the social New Jerusalem, it requires, but requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. A second and more practical but less systematic form of this socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of existence and economic relations could be of any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeoisie relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations, reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but at the best lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when and only when it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class, protective duties for the benefit of the working class, prison reform for the benefit of the working class. These are the last words and the only seriously meant words of bourgeois socialism. It is summed up in the phrase, "The bourgeois are bourgeois," for the benefit of the working class. And that sounds a lot like the quote-unquote democratic socialists that we have in America, or social democrats, just want to reform their way into a utopia that, Anyway, so number 3 is... Kitty. Number 3 is critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to that literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement, when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to the then undeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation. Conditions that had yet to be produced and could be produced by the impending bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism. and social leveling in its crudest form. I know. The socialist and communist systems properly, so-called those of Saint Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others, spring into existence the early undeveloped period, described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. See Section 1, Bourgeois and Proletarians, which we've read on the channel if you'd like to check that video out. No. The founders of these systems see, indeed, the class antagonisms as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. But the proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation, as such socialists find it, does not as yet offer to them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action. Historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones, and the gradual spontaneous class organization of the proletariat to an organization of society specially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself in their eyes into the propaganda and the practical carrying out of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to society at large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see it in the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, and endeavor by small experiments, necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example, to pave the way for the new social gospel. So I assume he's talking about people who, like an anarcho-communist, is sort of against the vanguard party, but they don't really have like an outline for how a revolution would work. Maybe anarcho-communist is the wrong word I'm using. But there are some people who claim that they're socialists but are against, like, revolutions. And it's like, then how do you expect it to happen? I mean, do you expect to snap your fingers and then socialist utopia, communism? So I think that's kind of what he's getting at. Don't placate to fascists. You know what I mean? Don't try and make them like you. Fuck them, Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for a general reconstruction of society. But these socialist and communist writings contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures proposed in them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, abolition of the family, of private gain, and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state into a mere superintendence of production. All these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonisms, which were at that time only just cropping up, and which in these publications are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were in many respects revolutionary, their disciples have in every case formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of their masters, in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor that consistently to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonisms. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolated phalansteres, of establishing home colonies, or setting up a little Icaria, pocket editions of the New Jerusalem. I think he's talking about maybe a commune here. I don't know for sure. And to realize all these castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to the feelings and purses of the bourgeois. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary conservative socialism depicted above, differing from these only by more systematic pedantry and by their fanatical and superstitious belief, Jesus Christ, in the miraculous effects of their social science. They therefore violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists, in France, respectively, oppose the Chartists and the Reformistes. And that is the end of chapter 3. This was a tough one, man, because I don't know most of what he's referring to. But it sounds like he's basically just roasting a bunch of fake socialists. You know what I just realized is chapter 4 is only a page and a half long, so I'm going to read chapter 4 as well. But before I do, I just want to briefly say, I think he's basically just talking about, at that time, there were a bunch of writers first kind of discovering, these criticisms of capitalism. And so there were probably a bunch of new ideas at the time. And I think he's just kind of going through and shitting on all of them, basically, is what it sounds like he's doing. And I don't know any better to, say otherwise. So I think it's basically just him saying, here's all these other fucking ideas, and here's why they're fucking wrong, and, you're all a bunch of idiots, basically. It's funny because he is a pretty funny guy in his tone. He's so very serious, and but his tone is very pointed sometimes, and he just roasts people. So we are going to finish the book here, because this is literally a page and a half, and then there's some notes, but that is references that I did not bother with. So the final page and a half is chapter 4, Position of the Communists in Relation to the Various Existing Opposition Parties. Section 2 has made clear the relations of the communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. But in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. In France, the communists ally themselves with the Social Democrats against the conservative and radical bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right to take up a critical position in regard to phrases and allusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals without losing sight of the fact that this party consists of antagonistic elements, partly of democratic socialists in the French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on an agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation, that party which fomented the insurrection of Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeois whenever it acts in a revolutionary way against the absolute monarchy. The feudal squirearchy, and the petty bourgeoisie. but they never cease for a single instant to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. In order that the German workers may straightway use, and as so many weapons against the bourgeoisie, the social and political conditions that the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy. And in order that, after the fall of the reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeoisie itself may immediately begin. The communists turn their attention chiefly to Germany because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization, and with a much more developed proletariat than what existed in England in the 17th and France in the 18th century. And because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen, Carl. I regret to inform you. It actually went the other way. And it went the exact opposite, actually. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front, as the leading question in each case, the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. Finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of all countries. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. And that is the end, folks, of the Communist Manifesto. It has been a pleasure reading this, and especially there at the end, is exceptionally topical, because there's a huge debate in communist circles and left-leaning circles in general, even if people aren't a Marxist or Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, whatever label you want to be. There's a huge debate about, do we support Democrats? Are Democrats the lesser evil? And it sounds like, in one aspect, maybe. But at the same time, he's basically saying communists will support any fight against the status quo, essentially. That's interesting, because does that mean communists would support... I don't know. It's a complicated question, and it's something that obviously Marx didn't know what would happen in 2026. So I still don't really have an answer. You know, do you vote for Gavin Newsom in 2028 as a communist? Or are you just serving to further the bourgeoisie? I mean, you know, especially, and it makes the best example would be of Palestine. I support the people of Palestine, and I support Hamas resisting against the occupational colony of Israel. Hamas aren't communists, right? They're not left-wing. Now, the PFLP are they're Marxists, but they're not the biggest force. Hamas is the biggest force. And so I support them in resisting against Israel. Does that mean I support their exact political standing? No, but I support them resisting against Israel's genocide and against Israel's occupation and colonization. And I kind of think that's really the most important thing that the end of this book gets across. I don't know that it necessarily answers the question, should I vote for a Democrat or should I just stay home? But it definitely answers the question, you know, do you support uprisings and resistance against colonization and obviously genocide? Jesus Christ. You shouldn't even have to debate that. Now, obviously, there is no mention in here of color revolution, and that's a whole nother topic And I'm sure that there are people who have written about color revolution that we can read in another time. And in that vein, in terms of what book to read next, I have quite a few. I have What Is to Be Done by Vladimir Lenin. I have a Rosa Luxemburg book. Matter of fact, let me just go check and see which one. Give me a moment. Okay, here's the recent books I have. Just got this one in yesterday. This is by Any Means Necessary by Malcolm X. I actually have read a good bit of this one, but stopped. This is The American Revolution by Herbert Aptheker, and that is a Marxist perspective of the American Revolution. I do have quotations from Mao. I have What Is to Be Done by Lenin, and I have Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg. The Herbert Aptheker book's the only one that I've even opened and read. I am about 75 pages in, but I'd happily start over if that's the one most people are interested in. I'd like to see what book, if any of these, you'd like me to read next. Completely open to any of them. Or if a bunch of people want me to read something else, I'm sure I can find it in a thrift bookstore pretty cheap, or I can even rent it from the library. So if there's something you have in mind, I'm losing my voice, Jesus Christ. If there's something you have in mind, just let me know. If you don't like any of the ones I have here. Because I haven't read them, and again, this series was meant to give me an excuse to read these books by putting it out on the internet for other people to see. This is just meant to be a judgment-free environment where we read physical media and learn together, and that's really the whole point of it. So if any of those books strike your fancy, if somebody has already left a comment, the book that you want me to read next, just like it, and if there's one particular one that has a bunch of likes on it, then maybe I'll just start with that one, because I don't really care either way which one I read next. I want to read all of these at some point. So it's a great excuse to read it by doing it on the channel, So I appreciate everybody watching these videos. This has been a white trash guy reading the Communist Manifesto. Just released an album called Welcome to the Dystopia. It's got 18 tracks on it. I'm very proud of it. It'll probably be in the outro card of this video and maybe in the recommended on my channel. It's on all streaming platforms, as well as for free right here on YouTube. I uploaded the full unabridged album, 50 minutes long, so I'd appreciate if you gave that a chance as well. But anyway, I'll get off of here. I've wasted enough of your time, and I appreciate you being here for this. I always wanted to do something like this, and so we'll see where we head next. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you protect your community. I hope you take care of yourself, because it is scary out there, and all we have is each other. Nothing to lose but our chains. Hope you have a good night. I'll talk to you soon.